Good evening. First, I'd like to thank Mike Hall and everyone at CORSA who made it possible for me to be here today. I'd like to make a special thank you to two very extraordinary people. First, I'd like to thank Eva McGuire, the Corvair Lady. She has been instrumental in helping me tell my grandfather's story. I also want to thank Mike McKeel, the greatest Corvair mechanic I've ever met. We've never been more comfortable or confident in somebody working on our baby. Now, who the hell is Frank Winchell? Well, if Ed Cole is the father of the Corvair, then Frank Winchell is the Corvair's big brother. The kind of big brother that, upon hearing of someone picking on one of his siblings, would pack a picnic basket full of knuckle sandwiches and take the bully out to lunch. As far as the development of the Corvair is concerned, Frank Winchell was responsible for this transaxle. However, his greatest contribution was his role in the Corvair litigation, the highly successful role. At the onset of the Corvair litigation, Frank Winchell was director of Chevrolet Research and Development. His objective for the Corvair litigation was to educate the many lawyers, judges, and jurors of the elementary laws of physics and how and why they impacted vehicle dynamics. Frank, along with his right-hand man, Jim Musser, as well as a good one-third of the Chevy R&D staff, designed various demonstrations and built elaborate models to accomplish this task. Then they made a movie titled A Car on Trial, which brought it all together. In accomplishing this endeavor, they were able to definitively prove that the Corvair was not a defective automobile, that it did not suddenly, unexpectedly, and for no apparent reason go out of control. They proved that the 60 to 63 Corvair was as good or better than all cars on the American roads at that time, a fact agreed upon by the United States Department of Transportation's National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration, as well as in the United States Senate subcommittee, among others. Frank Winchell was considered to be GM's expert witness and actually only gave testimony in the first three trials that were tried to a jury verdict: Collins, Anderson, and Drummond, all verdicts in favor of General Motors. It was during this time that Frank Winchell developed an intense, deep down repugnance for lawyers. Bean counters were a close second. I can speak on this personally because Frank Winchell was my grandfather. One thing I fondly remember about him was he liked to quote Shakespeare. To be more precise, he liked to quote Dick the Butcher from Shakespeare's Henry VI. He's the guy that said, "First thing we need to do is kill all the lawyers." To shed some more light on the subject, the following is a letter written by attorney John Constanzo in 1982. Quote, "I, as a lawyer, first met Frank back in 1964 when we were involved in some litigation involving the Corvair automobile. After a careful and absolute screening, during which time Frank made sure I had no concealed weapons, tape recorders, or other evidence of the despicable character of most lawyers, Frank finally consented to talk with me. During the course of our discussion, it became apparent that Frank had a unique disregard for lawyers. I wish to dispel one rumor right now. Frank does not hate all lawyers. He only hates those lawyers who are on his side. The rest of the lawyers he despises." In any event, during one of the first Corvair lawsuits that was tried, I recall that I was called upon to represent the dealer, while another gentleman, now deceased, represented General Motors. During the course of our discussions, before and during trial, Frank consented to act as a witness and reluctantly agreed that he would testify, provided that the lawyer who was going to put him on the stand, representing General Motors, did not ask him a certain question. When he was finally put on the witness stand, I believe the first or second question that was asked by the lawyer, after qualifying Frank, was the very question that Frank had asked not to be asked. Observing the blood rising up to the level of his eyebrows, I, as co-counsel, objected to their question, and Frank objected to my objecting to the question. He wanted to kill the General Motors lawyer. Now, in most states, killing lawyers is considered justifiable homicide. However, Most judges frown upon the practice in their courtrooms because of the risks involved from ricocheting bullets and the high cost of cleaning blood-stained judicial robes. Therefore, the court sustained the objection, mollified Frank, who then proceeded to win the lawsuit. I'm not being modest when I say that Frank won the lawsuit. After almost 30 years in this business of trying lawsuits before juries, I am convinced that good witnesses win lawsuits, I'm convinced that good witnesses win lawsuits and lawyers lose them by not selecting and giving witnesses the material to expound and explain to the jury. Frank Winchell has a unique ability to put across esoteric engineering concepts into terms that jurors and sometimes even lawyers and judges can understand, unquote. My grandpa was a very hands-on type of engineer, and he wanted these lawyers to not only understand, but to experience how hard it was to roll a Corvair over. One of his favorite methods was to put a lawyer in the passenger seat of a Corvair and personally drive them around the GM Proving Ground skid pad. He would perform various maneuvers at and above the limit of control. After he was satisfied that there was sufficient amount of smoke and squealing from the tires, as well as plenty of squealing from the lawyer sitting next to him, he would then accelerate to top speed, yank the steering wheel hard to the left, and in the midst of performing this maneuver, he would casually reach over and pop the release button on the terrified lawyer's seatbelt, plastering them into the passenger door. Well, we can't talk about Corvairs and lawyers and not mention one person in particular. I have to say, I don't think I share the same opinion of Ralph Nader as my grandfather. Believe it or not, I actually have a picture of Ralph proudly hanging on my wall. After Unsafe at Any Speed was published, General Motors invited Ralph Nader to come to the GM Tech Center. And just like in the movie you're about to see, they explained to him, they explained and demonstrated how and why he was wrong about the handling characteristics of the Corvair. My grandfather told me that throughout the meeting, Ralph was very attentive and very appreciative of the information. When the meeting was over, my grandfather said he was sure they had changed the mind of this puerile lawyer. After the meeting was adjourned, my grandfather walked over to the third floor balcony and he called Ralph over and pointed down to the floor of the lobby. And he said to Ralph, "From this height, you would hit the ground at the same speed you would hit the dashboard in a 35-mile-an-hour collision. So if I put an inch of padding down there, can I throw you off?" He said Ralph got a little jittery after that. Nevertheless, old Ralph got out his pen and paper and his giant book of fancy adjectives and started writing letters to senators and anyone else who would listen. He continued to declare that the Corvair was a defective automobile and that GM knew it all along, but sold it anyways because it was low cost and more profitable. He also professed that Frank Winchell was a liar. However, he used nifty words like consciously erroneous or purposely inaccurate and grossly misleading. He also went on to say that my grandfather's testimony was, quote, a clear presumption of malfeasance or nonfeasance of the grossest magnitude, and that it, quote, forced juries to come to wrong conclusions. Well, of course, old Ralph couldn't be more wrong. Again, a fact reiterated by a United States Senate subcommittee in 1973, when they investigated my grandfather's honesty on old Ralph's behalf. Their conclusion is as follows. Nader's allegations against Frank Winchell are unjustified. Winchell bore the brunt of Nader's letters and Winchell bore the brunt of Nader's charges in the letters of October 23, 1970 and July 8, 1971, both of which were publicly released and widely reported. Accordingly, we believe it is appropriate to state for the record that we could find no factual basis for Nader's allegations. So far as we could determine in his testimony in court and interviews with us, Winchell's statements were accurate and honest to the best of his knowledge and belief, unquote. I asked my grandfather once why he hated Ralph Nader so much. He told me he didn't hate him at all. He hates what he stands for. He said Ralph saw an opportunity that he could exploit for his own personal gain. He went on to describe him as the worst kind of opportunist. How do you think Ralph Nader would describe the automobile and what it's done for our society? How would you describe it? I think of things like freedom, utility, convenience, and pure, unadulterated joy. This is old Ralph's take on it. For over half a century, the automobile has brought death, injury, and the most inestimable sorrow and deprivation to millions of people. That's the very first line in his book, Unsafe at Any Speed. Now, whenever my grandfather would read a book, he always would take a highlighter and highlight the text he thought notable and jot down notes in pencil in the margins. While reading my grandfather's copy of Unsafe at Any Speed, I noticed something I'd never seen him do before. He got out a big red marker and wrote these lines. We should not back away from this. No one should be allowed to get away with this. And you know what? I, for one, am not going to back away from this. I, for one, will not allow him to get away with this. Oh yeah, by the way, that picture of Ralph Nader I have hanging on my wall is covering my dartboard. I need to say one thing. If old Ralph badmouths my grandfather or the Corvair one more time, I may suddenly, unexpectedly, and for no apparent reason go out of control. So Frank Winchell helped to exonerate the Corvair to our government and in our courts of law, but his message did not reach the general public. This needs to change. I want to put an end to society's erroneous belief that the Corvair was a dangerous car, and I think my grandfather should be the one to do it. I believe I have found a way to bring back the public's attention to the Corvair. I want to fill Ralph Nader's hometown with as many Corvairs as possible. I visualize an annual event, perhaps a Corvair Road Rally from Willow Run to Winsted, Connecticut. We all know the significance of Willow Run, but Winsted, Connecticut is Ralph Nader's hometown and the location of his American Museum of Tort Law. In this museum, Ralph has one of our beloved Corvairs held prisoner, on display like a hunting trophy. This is unacceptable to me. I would love to see his parking lot chock full of Corvairs, forcing the nation and perhaps the world to take notice. Then, with a recording of a speech my grandfather gave at the 1979 CORSA Convention in Detroit, along with a car on trial, we will, once and for all, put to rest the controversy about the safety of our hallowed Corvair. Now let's talk some more about the American Museum of Tort Law. There are 4 elements to tort law: duty, breach of duty, causation, and injury. In order to claim damages, there must be a breach in the duty of the defendant toward the plaintiff, which results in injury. Therefore, by definition, there is absolutely no reason for a Corvair to be on display at the American Museum of Tort Law, let alone its most prevalent exhibit. And I will not rest until that car is freed from its prison and put back on the American roads where it belongs. For more information on how to facilitate help me facilitate this endeavor, please visit my website at frankwinchell.com. I'm also passing out flyers. Together, we can rewrite the story of our favorite little car. Lastly, I want to point out that I'm wearing my grandfather's hunting jacket. I thought it was appropriate that I wore it this evening because I'm hunting Ralph Nader. And I need your help to catch him. Thank you. Next, I'd like to introduce Jim Musser. According to my grandpa, he was the greatest engineer he's ever worked with, and that is saying a lot.